Now, in order to understand how this piece was created, you first have to learn a little bit about each element that went into it. The first element is the idea of permutations and how they are used to create musical patterns. Let's take two items, item A and item B. Now, I want to know how many patterns, how many different arrangements can you make of A and B in total. Now, this is a small enough problem to be able to do by trial and error. So let's begin by picking an order. A followed by B. Simple enough. What's the next pattern you could do? Well, we could also do B followed by A. In that case, we have two orderings of A and B where we don't repeat. Now, those are called permutations without repetition. Now, it's important to note that this is not a combination. A combination is merely a set without an order. So when you're looking at A and B, there is only one combination, and that is AB. So now let's do something slightly different. Let's go back to your individual items A and B, and let's say I have a lot of them. I have as many of them as I'd like. Now I want to ask the question, how many permutations can I make where we can repeat an item as much as we want? We can get A and B, we could do B and A. We can also now do A and B and B. Now that's 4 different orderings. We call this permutation with repetition. Now this is what we're going to be using for the composition of this piece. And I'll get into the musical applications of this in a minute, but let's first talk about how you can calculate this without doing it by trial and error. As the number of individual elements you're combining goes up, you're going to get a huge growth in the potential permutations. And so you want a way to be able to calculate this. And there's a very simple equation. It's n to the r, where n is the number you have to choose from, and r is the number chosen of each type. For this example, the number we can choose from is 2. We can choose A and we can choose B. And then the R is 2. We can choose 1 for each step. And so when you calculate it, 2 raised to the 2, you get 4, which is what we found by trial and error. So how does this apply musically? Well, we can take the set we just calculated, this set of permutation with repetition, and make a little substitution. Let's say every time you hit an A, you hit a drum. And let's say every time you see a B, you rest. Now you can start to see that we can generate different patterns of playing based on this same technique. You see at the bottom is 2 rests, followed by a rest and an eighth note and a rest, and 2 eighth notes. And that is every permutation possible with eighth notes. That's kind of handy. We can do the same thing with triplet eighth notes. Simply do n to the r, where n is 2 because you can choose either to hit the drum or not hit the drum, and then 3 because you're trying to fill 3 slots in a triplet. The result is 8 different patterns, and when you go and do this, either by a computer algorithm or by hand, you find the 8 different patterns that you can play given a triplet. Now, if we think about this from a drum set perspective, we've generated all the different ways that you can play a triplet, given the option of hitting the drum or resting. Obviously, there's infinite ways that you can express that, but as far as sheer muscle interaction with the drum, you are either hitting the drum or you are not hitting the drum. So what we've done here is figure out every single way that you can fill one beat of music with notes, presuming you subdivide as an eighth note or a triplet. Now the question arises is, what can I do when I'm sitting in a drum set and I have 4 limbs available to me? Well, each of these patterns can apply to a given limb. So sitting at a drum set, I've got my right hand on the ride cymbal, I've got my right foot on the bass drum, got my left hand on the snare drum, and I've got my left foot on a hi-hat pedal. That's pretty common amongst all drum sets, those components. And now the question is, how many ways can I fill up a triplet using all 4 limbs? Well, we've already shown how you can do that with 1 limb. All we have to do is now repeat that for each individual limb. Now, n to the r helped us before calculate how many different permutations you can play with 1 hand, which is 8. Well, now what we can do is assume we have 8 different patterns to choose from per limb, and 4 different limbs to work with. How many ways can you fill up that while allowing you to repeat a given pattern? Or to phrase the question another way, given this technique of stacking patterns on top of each other, how many different things can I play within a beat while I'm sitting in a drum set? Well, if you have 8 patterns per limb and 4 limbs to work with, End of the R will give you 4,096 different permutations of a beat you can play, assuming you have a triplet subdivision. Well, now that we have the pattern down, we can extend it out to other subdivisions of a note. Let's say just a strict straight eighth note. Well, you have 256 permutations that are available to you. Or how about a 16th subdivision? Well, when you look at that, you have 65,536 different ways that you can play a 16th note amongst your 4 limbs on a drum set. Well, now, while some of these numbers seem pretty big, let's say you're sitting in a drum set and you're playing them at a tempo of 120 beats per minute. Or in other words, every minute you work through 120 of these permutations. How long would it take you to play through all of them? Well, it's a pretty simple calculation. The first one, 256 beats times 120 beats per minute, gives you 2 minutes. For triplets, it's 34 minutes. And for 16th notes, it's 546 minutes, or about 9.1 hours. Now, while 9.1 hours is a long time, it's not an infinite time. So it's not out of the question that you could actually sit and play through each one of these permutations in the course of a day. That was kind of surprising to me. When composing permutations, I focused on the first 2, straight eighth notes and eighth note triplets. I talk about this more in the album notes, but in essence, it's derived from the fact that you can create any of the permutations in the 16th note set from the eighth note set. And I figured both the eighth note and triplet eighth note sets are quicker to play. They'll be more accessible to drummers. I don't know many people who'd want to sit and learn a 9.1 hour piece of music. I figured they'd be more effective as teaching tools. And so I focused on those first 2 and left the third one as an exercise for the reader.